And I'm going to go back to this, though. We as Americans should not be penalizing income, right? There's a difference between having a lot of income in a given year and having a lot of wealth. Why do we want to penalize prosperity? Why do we want to stick it to anyone who's willing to work a little bit harder? Florida Congressman and Freedom Caucus founding member Ron DeSantis joining me right now. And, Congressman, what Blake just mentioned there is a very interesting thing, both politically and economically, right? Because the White House potentially is putting forward, 35%, maybe higher on top earners, but also talking about potentially removing deductions that you would pay, say, at the local and at the state level. Now, I know for you guys in Florida, that doesn't mean much because you got a pretty good tax structure there for the individuals. But in places like New York and California and some of these blue states, basically, people might wind up paying a whole lot more. In other words, the federal government is saying we're not going to subsidize these states anymore.
Well, and that would make it be smart for people in those states to go to their legislatures and say, look, the party's over. You're not going to keep fleecing taxpayers. We're not going to incentivize you to do that at the federal level. So maybe you should actually start looking out for the interest of taxpayers in your state instead of always looking at the interests of the government and the government interests in your state. Yeah. But I think the overall issue here is even if you have a top rate of 35, and you remove some of the deductions, it hasn't been determined when that income will hit. So right now, the top tax rate hits at about $400,000 and some $1,000. Everything I've heard is that if there is a top rate in that area, that it's not going to attach until people are making seven figures. So you're going to have a lot of people in high tax states, particularly dual income households, who are making $400,000 or $500,000 a year. And in places in my district, that would be a lot of money, but with how much you're taxed in high tax states, you actually will be better off with that. So we're going to get more details on it.
We do need more details, and you're never going to convince me, even for the tippy top 1% earners, that anybody should be paying more tax. I want to see it go the other way for everybody, but specifically for the middle class. Congressman, I talk a lot about on this show the hourglass economy because I fear that in today's society, you got the people on top that are always going to do just fine because they got the money. You got the people on the bottom, right, that Obama made sure they were taken care of. They have lots of handouts that make it easier for them. But it's the people in the middle that don't have a ton of money and that don't have the handouts and can't get those handouts that are really suffering. Isn't that who we need to help with this tax policy?
Without question, you can do it a number of different ways, which I think this plan will do. One, you're lowering their rate so they will be able to keep more of their money. Two, you're making the tax code much simpler so that they can fill out their tax returns on a postcard. They don't have to hire an accountant or a lawyer to do it. And many Americans, even in the middle income brackets, do have to do that because no one understands the tax code. And then the third thing I'd say is when you're making our business tax structure competitive with the rest of the world, and you're allowing businesses to repatriate foreign profits and reinvest in the United States, that has an impact on wages for people who are working for those companies and obviously the ability to create more jobs. So I think there'll be more opportunity for middle-income Americans, and I think they'll have the ability to advance throughout society with a pro-growth tax structure compared to the structure that we have now.
I hope so, because I really think they have been unfairly penalized in all of this. You mentioned offshore profits. We get $2 trillion+ sitting overseas. Now, again, this is a very loose framework, and we're very excited momentarily to be hearing more details, both from Republicans and from the president coming up. But, in terms of that overseas component of it, you get all that money sitting there. You could bring it back. They're talking about doing it as a one-time thing. I don't know if that's going to work. I'd like to see it just permanent. Say, okay, guess what? From here on out, all that money overseas, you can bring it back. You can bring it back without a penalty. Make it work for us.
I agree. And the thing is, the money is being taxed when they're making overseas profits. They pay taxes to those countries that they're making the profits in. And so you have some large companies that have a big presence in the United States. We should want to incentivize them to bring money back here rather than put up roadblocks to them bringing money back here. So I think making that incentive permanent would just be a much better tax structure, because if you do it as a one-time thing, I think that would be a good little juice to the economy. But then 5 years from now, we end up in the same place as the overseas profits accumulate and they stay parked outside American shores.
Makes no sense at all. Hey, quickly, Congressman, before I let you go, what do you think of Chuck Schumer trying to sell this as a tax plan, a tax cut for the rich?
No matter anything Republicans do with taxes, he's always going to say it's a tax cut for the rich. But I'd love to see some of his constituents in New York making $75,000, $100,000, $150,000 if they think that they're undertaxed. I think most of them think they're overtaxed.